By the end of this module, you'll understand the leadership shift from managing through involvement to leading through design. You'll recognize the habits that quietly keep teams dependent, understand the operating rules that replace them, and know where your leadership attention creates the most leverage. Most importantly, you will leave with a clear lens for deciding when to step in, when to step back, and how to build results that hold without your constant involvement. If you're here, you already know how to manage. You know how to track work, meet deadlines, solve problems, and keep things moving. This module is not about doing more of that. It's about deciding differently. At a certain point in a manager's career, the problem isn't lack of skill. It's that the habits that made you successful no longer scale. You're effective, you're reliable, and you're exhausted. And things still seem to run better when you're in the middle of them. That's the moment that this module is for. This module operates at a different level of leadership. We're not focusing on basic management skills or step-by-step supervision. And this isn't about pushing yourself to work harder. The focus here is different. We're going to look at how leaders think and decide when situations are complex and the answers aren't obvious. Many managers at this stage aren't struggling. They're over-functioning. They're the reliable fixer, the person that people go to when something is unclear, the one who keeps things from falling apart. And that feels like leadership. It's rewarded, it's visible, and it works for a while. The problem is that when everything depends on your involvement, progress doesn't compound. It plateaus, and so do you. I remember a point in my own career when I could walk into a room and immediately see what needed fixing, and I was good at it. Work moved faster when I stepped in. Decisions got made, problems disappeared. What I didn't see at first was what else was happening. People were waiting. Capability was stalling. And I was quietly training the organization to rely on me instead of think. It took me longer than I'd like to admit to realize that my effectiveness had actually become a constraint. At this stage, leadership stops being about effort. Your job is no longer to move the work. Your job is to shape how the work moves without you. That requires a shift in identity. From manager as doer to leader as designer. From being helpful to being intentional. From reacting quickly to deciding carefully. This shift is uncomfortable because it asks you to let go of things that you're good at. Habits that once made you successful can now slow your team down, and not because they're wrong, but because they're too expensive. And that's what we're going to make visible. In this module, we're going to retire 3 very common habits of good managers that no longer scale. Being the reliable fixer, staying constantly available, proving value through effort. These habits are rewarded, they're praised, and they quietly keep your teams dependent. Letting go of those habits isn't about doing less. It's about leading differently. That's why we replace them with a new set of operating rules. Not tips, rules. Rules that sound simple and feel hard. I do not solve problems my team is capable of solving. I make decisions and standards visible so I don't have to be. I spend my time where my judgment has the highest leverage. I allow competent people to struggle without rescuing them. I measure my leadership by outcomes that endure, not effort that impresses. If even one of those makes you uncomfortable, that's a useful sign. Before we go further, I want you to notice something. If you continue leading the way you do today, you will stay essential, but what you're building will only hold as long as you're in the middle of it. Leadership at this level isn't about being needed. It's about building something that holds when you step back, not because you matter less, but because your influence is now embedded in how the work operates. As you move through this module, I'm going to ask you to look honestly at which habit you rely on most, which rule you break most often, and what you will need to stop doing before anything else can change. This isn't about judgment, it's about clarity. And clarity is what allows results to compound. Clarity compounds results, but only when the habits behind your leadership actually support it. Let's start with the first habit that no longer serves you, the habit that no longer scales. Being the reliable fixer. This is the habit that gets you promoted. You see problems early, you step in quickly, you make things work when they shouldn't. People trust you because when something is stuck, you get it unstuck. And this habit feels responsible. Work moves faster when you intervene. Deadlines are protected, escalations get avoided. And from the outside, it looks like leadership. You're visible, you're competent, and you're useful. This is why letting go of this habit is so hard. It has worked. Here's the part that most managers miss. When you consistently fix problems for your team, you teach them something, and not intentionally and not maliciously, but you teach them that escalation is faster than thinking, that you are the safest place for decisions, that judgment lives above them, not with them. And over time, problems get smaller and capability stops growing. The trade-off looks like this. Things get solved, people do not develop. And eventually, you become the bottleneck that you never intended to be. If work can't move without you, leadership isn't present. Dependence is. I remember sitting in a meeting where a routine decision came to the table, something the team could have handled easily. And in hindsight, they absolutely could have. I had built this team from a mandate on a piece of paper. I carried the vision in my head, and I felt responsible for keeping it steady. So when everyone looked at me, naturally, I stepped in and I answered. And I told myself I was being helpful. But what I was really doing was making myself essential. The moment it clicked for me was uncomfortable because I had to admit something quietly true. Things worked better with me in the middle. And that was the problem. For me, the shift came when I stopped positioning myself as the decision point and started redesigning how decisions were made without me. At this level, leadership is not about solving the problem. It's about deciding who should solve it and under what conditions. Your value no longer comes from having the answer. It comes from holding the space long enough for thinking to happen. That requires restraint, and restraint is a skill. This is why we replace the fixer habit with this operating rule. I do not solve problems my team is capable of solving. Not because I don't care, not because I'm disengaged, but because solving the wrong problem steals capacity from the system. In practice, this means you stop answering questions that can be reasoned through. You ask, "What do you think?" and wait. You resist the urge to jump in just to be helpful. Yes, it will feel slower at first, and that discomfort is temporary. The capability that follows is not. So let me name something so you don't misinterpret it. When you stop fixing, you may feel irresponsible, uncomfortable, and slightly negligent. That feeling is not failure. It's withdrawal from overfunctioning. Here's a leadership check-in. The test that I want you to carry with you. Ask yourself this. If I solve this, what capability am I preventing from forming? If the answer is they need to learn this, then stepping back is leadership. Retiring the fixer habit doesn't make you less valuable. It makes your leadership harder to replace. In the next habit, we'll look at what happens when availability becomes the operating model and why being accessible is not the same thing as being effective. The second habit that no longer scales is constant availability. You answer quickly, you're approachable, you keep your door open, your inbox monitored, your calendar is flexible. People know they can reach you, and that feels like good leadership. At earlier stages of leadership, that kind of availability is often necessary. As your team becomes more capable, it starts to have unintended effects. Constant availability gets framed as support, as care, and as being a good leader. People feel heard, questions get answered quickly, decisions move faster when you're there to make them. And again, this habit works until it doesn't. When your availability becomes the system, something else quietly disappears. Thinking. People stop pausing before they ask. They stop reasoning things through. They interrupt instead of decide, and not because they're incapable. It's because you've made access easier than judgment. Now, let's be precise here. The problem is not that people ask questions. The problem is that everything becomes a question. When you're always available, you unintentionally teach the team that clarity lives with you, decisions wait for you, and hard calls should be escalated upward. So over time, leadership collapses inward. One experience that stuck with me was leading a team where we were running 2 projects while also refining policy, and the team naturally had questions coming from every direction. By mid-morning, my calendar was already full of short conversations, quick check-ins, just a quick question. Can I run something by you? And individually, they felt harmless, but collectively, they erased my thinking time, the time that I actually needed to lead and plan. I wasn't leading. I was buffering the organization from its own fluctuating priorities. And here's the reframe that changes everything. Your job is not to be available. Your job is to be clear. Availability feels generous. Clarity creates independence. When clarity is missing, availability fills the gap, and that gap never closes on its own. This is why we replace constant availability with this operating rule. I make decisions and standards visible so I don't have to be. That means priorities are explicit. Decision boundaries are known, and what good looks like is documented. When clarity exists, interruptions drop, not because people are shut out, but because they don't need you as often. In practice, this means you stop answering questions that have already been decided. You redirect people back to shared agreements, and you resist redeciding things in the moment. And yes, at first, people will test the boundary. That's not resistance, that's recalibration. Let me name that feeling that comes up here so you don't mislabel it. When you're less available, you may feel distant, unhelpful, or like you're letting people down. That discomfort is not disengagement, it's leadership shifting from presence to design. Here's a leadership check-in question I want you to carry with you. Have I already made this decision clear somewhere, or am I remaking it because I'm here? If it's the second one, availability is costing you leverage. Stepping back from constant availability doesn't reduce trust. It increases capability. In the next habit, we'll look at the most personal one of all, proving value through effort, and why busyness is one of the hardest leadership identities to let go of. The third habit that no longer scales is proving value through effort. Long days, full calendar, visible contribution. You're busy because the work matters. You stay close because things are complex. You step in because outcomes matter. And again, this habit works until it quietly becomes your leadership identity. Effort is easy to see. People notice when you stay late, when you carry a heavy load, when you respond quickly and keep things moving. And in many organizations, effort gets mistaken for leadership. And when you've built a career on being dependable, it's tempting to keep proving your value the same way. Here's the part that's uncomfortable to name. When effort becomes the signal of leadership, thinking gets crowded out. You fill your time with execution, you leave little space for judgment. You stay productive and increasingly reactive. The work gets done, but direction does not deepen. This habit is hard to let go of because it's personal. Many managers tie their sense of worth to how much they carry. Being busy feels responsible. Being indispensable feels validating. But leadership at this level isn't about being the hardest worker in the room. It's about making the work clearer, lighter, and more focused for everyone else. I remember a stretch of time when my calendar was packed, my days were full. We were delivering the work in front of us, but I wasn't getting enough thinking time to see the next quarter, where we needed to reprioritize and hire for what was coming. I could point to everything I touched, but what I couldn't point to was how we were getting ahead. I was productive, but I wasn't shaping the work in a way that would hold without me. That realization was uncomfortable because it meant effort was no longer the right measure of my leadership. At this stage, leadership shifts again. Your job is not to do more. Your job is to decide where effort belongs, where it's wasted, and where restraint will produce better results. If your calendar is full, but nothing improves without you, effort has become a substitute for judgment. This is why we replace effort as value with this operating rule. I spend my time where my judgment has the highest leverage. That means not every task deserves your attention. Not every meeting needs your presence, and not every problem benefits from your involvement. Leadership leverage comes from choice, not volume. So in practice, this means you protect thinking time like it matters because it does. You decline work that keeps you busy but doesn't move the system. You stop equating exhaustion with contribution. This will feel risky at first because you'll be doing less of what people can easily see and more of what quietly changes outcomes. Let's name the feeling that shows up here. When you step out of constant effort, you may feel guilty. You may feel exposed, like you're not doing enough. That discomfort is not laziness. It's leadership recalibrating. Here's another leadership check-in question I want you to carry with you. If I weren't here, would this still move forward, or have I made myself essential through effort? If progress depends on your busyness, leadership hasn't scaled yet. Letting go of effort as proof doesn't make you less committed. It makes your leadership more durable. When effort is replaced with judgment, results stop relying on how hard you push and start compounding on their own. Let's pause for a moment and pull this together. So in this module, we didn't talk about new skills. We talked about letting go of habits that once made you successful, and now quietly limit how far you and your team can go. Being the reliable fixer, staying constantly available, proving value through effort. None of these are bad habits, but they're expensive ones. If something felt uncomfortable as we work through these, that's expected. What's shifting here isn't technique, it's identity. Leadership at this level stops being about how much you do and starts being about how deliberately you decide. That's why we replaced these habits with a new set of operating rules. I do not solve problems my team is capable of solving. I make decisions and standards visible so I don't have to be. I spend my time where my judgment has the highest leverage. I allow competent people to struggle without rescuing them. I measure my leadership by outcomes that endure, not effort that impresses. These are not suggestions. They are the cost of leading at this level. This is your stop doing commitment. Choose one operating rule to hold deliberately this week. Notice where the old habit shows up and practice stepping back, even when involvement feels responsible. You don't need to apply all of these at once, but you do need to notice which one you break most often. That rule points directly to the habit that you rely on when things get uncomfortable. And that habit is where your leadership has the most room to grow. So let me be clear about one thing. Leading this way will feel slower at first. You'll step back, you'll wait longer, you'll resist jumping in. That's not loss of control. That's leadership creating space for capability to form. If the work still holds when you're not there, leadership is present. If progress depends on your involvement, leadership hasn't scaled yet. This course exists to help you cross that line deliberately. So here's a field application. Over the next week, I want you to notice one real moment where you would normally step in, answer quickly, or push through effort. Pause. Apply the operating rule that you chose. Observe what changes in the team, the decision, or the outcome. In the next module, we'll build on this foundation by looking at how leaders communicate decisions, not just information. When judgment becomes your primary tool, communication changes. Less explaining, more alignment, clearer direction. That's where we're headed next. For now, don't rush to change everything. Pay attention instead. Notice where you step in out of habit. Notice where effort replaces judgment. And notice where clarity would reduce the need for you to be present. That awareness alone is the beginning of leadership at this level.